What's up guys, and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you are new here, please kindly hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on new releases from us. Today we're talking about an existential threat that humanity faces but gets almost no media attention. We're talking about the impending population collapse that could leave many countries around the world economically ruined. As the global population has increased over $7 billion over the last century, many people have worried about overpopulation and food shortages. In fact, many ways the opposite has happened. Advances in farming technology have made food cheaper and more abundant than any other time in human history. Over the past 2 decades, hunger has declined to all-time lows, even in the least developed regions such as sub-Saharan Africa. Instead of suffering from overpopulation, many developed countries are facing the opposite problem of underpopulation. For example, Japan has suffered population declines every year since 2010, despite the fact that life expectancy is increasing. This has resulted in a rapidly aging population with a median age exceeding 48 years in 2021. The average age in the United States and Europe is not quite as high at 38 and 43 years, respectively. However, both regions are rapidly aging, and they will ultimately suffer the same fate. An aging population represents an existential risk to an economy. As a country ages, retired people make up a larger and larger proportion of the population. Retired people, by definition, do not produce any output. They fund their consumption either with their savings or Social Security benefits. The output that retirees consume is produced by young people who are still working 9-to-5 jobs. The proportion of the population engaged in productive labor will diminish, leading to reduced output per capita in living standards. This will take decades to play out, but we are already starting to see the devastating effects of population collapse in some countries. As its population has aged, Japan's GDP per capita has declined almost 10% since its peak in 1995. This is despite significant increases in technology during this period. The median age in the US and other developed countries is also rising steadily year over year. At the current rate, almost all developed countries will be doomed to declining living standards over the next few decades, just like Japan. Because the threat of the population collapse is still more than a decade away, politicians in Western countries are largely ignoring it. However, failure to acknowledge the problem will not make it disappear. The only notable person who has acknowledged the severity of this issue seems to be...
We should be concerned about demographic implosion.
Why do you say that?
So if you look at countries like Japan, most of Europe, China, and you look at the birth rate in a lot of those places is only at about half of the sustaining rate. When you have an inverted demographic pyramid, so if you look at the pyramid and you've got age variation, 60-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 20-year-olds, like sort of a demographic pyramid.
Right.
And in some countries it's like an upside down pyramid, so it'll sort of fall over. So it will not stand. What we'll actually have in those countries is a very high dependency ratio, where the number of people who are retired is very high relative to the number of people who are net producers. And so you cannot, the social safety net will not hold. We didn't evolve for this because we sort of evolved to just always procreate and there wasn't birth control or anything.
Right.
Just like have lots of babies. It's like pop the course and like hopefully some of them would survive. That was like all of human history until very recently. And now it's, you've got cases like Japan where adult diapers outsell baby diapers. Europe's in a similar situation. China's headed the same way because they've had the one-child policy, and then even though they've relieved the one-child policy, the social norm has become to have an average of 1 kid. So even when they relieved that requirement, it didn't change. You can imagine, like people sometimes say, well, what about immigration? It's like, okay, look, there's 1.5 billion people in China. Where is China going to get 700 million new people? Okay, that's like 3 Indonesians. It's like, it doesn't work. And the full gravity of this is not well understood, but will become a severe issue in the next few decades.
Obviously, the cause of the population implosion is that people are not having enough kids. To maintain a given level of population, each couple must have on average 2 kids. This is known as the fertility rate. This map shows the fertility rate by country. Purple countries have fertility rates of less than 2 and are thus experiencing a population implosion. As you can see, the United States, almost all of Europe, Russia, China, and Australia all have fertility rates of less than 2. The only countries with high fertility rates are developing countries such as those in Africa. The most extreme country is South Korea, with a fertility rate of 1, which is half the sustaining rate. At the current rate, South Korea's population will be cut in half in just 1 generation. Such a dramatic drop in population has never been observed in world history. The closest thing is the Black Plague in the 1300s, which wiped out up to 1/3 of the hardest-hit countries. For a country's population to be cut in half is uncharted territory. The economic and social consequences will be unprecedented. Thirdly, parents in rich countries have higher incomes and thus a greater ability to raise children. So it seems counterintuitive that rich countries have lower fertility rates. There are a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, women in developed countries have greater equality in employment opportunities. Thus, many of them avoid having children as they would rather focus on their careers. Also, in rich countries, kids have greater opportunities for education. Parents want to send their kids to college. Therefore, they only have 1 or 2 kids so that they can save up enough money to help them pay for university tuition fees. On the other hand, in poor countries, it is optimal to have as many kids as possible, in part so they can help out on the family farm. Whatever the reason, as countries get richer, people decide to have less kids. This is happening across the developed world with very few exceptions. Japan is the most advanced country as far as the aging population. It's important to look at Japan as an example, as most developed countries will end up in a similar situation as Japan within the next few decades. Over the post-World War II era, Japan's economy flourished. They rapidly adopted advancing technologies and took advantage of the rapidly globalizing market for automobiles and electronics. However, in 1991, they suffered from a massive stock and real estate crash, which sent the economy into a deep recession. Normally, when countries experience recessions, they recover after a few years and return back to their steady growth rates. However, this did not happen in Japan. They suffered more than 25 years of economic stagnation, with the average Japanese citizen in 2021 being worse off than they were in 1995. A large part of this can be explained by the aging population. As a share of retired people becomes greater and greater, a larger share of the country's resources will go towards retirement benefits. This leaves less money left over for investment in physical capital or innovation. The lack of investment causes the economy to stagnate. So what can governments do to stem the population implosion? Unfortunately, there's no easy solution to the problem. They can encourage people to have more kids through tax deductions and other incentives. However, this is easier said than done. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that it costs $233,000 to raise a kid from 0 to 18 years old in the U.S. This is not even including the cost of a college education or the opportunity cost if one parent quits their job to raise the kid. Most countries can only afford to offer tax incentives of a few $1,000s. With such hefty costs of raising a child, tax incentives are largely too small to matter. Developed countries can also try to solve the problem by allowing mass immigration of young people from poorer countries. Immigration is a very controversial political issue, as many people fear that it depresses the wages of the native population. Because of this, most developed countries do not allow immigration to nearly the extent necessary to solve the population problem. Furthermore, for countries like China, there are not enough migrants in the world to fill the population hole, even if they did allow open borders. There are no easy solutions to the population problem. If there were, countries like Japan would have already solved it by now. They are deeply rooted reasons for fertility decline in rich countries, and they will likely only increase over the next few decades. Given the dire outlook for the developed world, long-term investors should position themselves carefully to limit their risk. It is possible that the unfavorable supply-side effects of the population implosion will result in scarcity of goods and thus price inflation. Thus, it may be prudent to limit your exposure to cash or bonds. These are nominal assets whose value will be eroded by inflation. Real assets like real estate and stocks will get investors better protection from inflation. The economic consequences of the population bomb may also have dire effects on stock markets. For example, Japan's Nikkei stock index has suffered 30 years of stagnation, decreasing 25% from its peak in 1989 through today. The CIA keeps track of the median population in every country, and we've included a link in the description below. Investors may want to take age data into account when deciding country allocations for globally diversified stock portfolios. Countries with low median ages are obviously less at risk of a population implosion, and all else equal can have better potential for economic growth. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about the population implosion? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for future videos. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.